Most people think discipline is about pushing harder, grinding more, or forcing yourself to do things you don't feel like doing. But real, lasting discipline isn't built on pressure, it's built on wiring. It's built on how your brain is structured to respond to cues, habits, and intention. And one of the most powerful things you can do to rewire your brain for unstoppable discipline is something simple. Set a clear intention first thing in the morning. Now, I'm not talking about vague motivation. I'm not saying you need to jump out of bed and scream affirmations or visualize some fantasy life. I'm talking about something much more grounded in how your brain actually works. The brain is predictive. It wants to know what's coming, what to focus on, and what to filter out. So when you wake up and you immediately give it direction, something to anchor to, it starts to shape the rest of your day around that. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, focus, and planning, is most sensitive in the early part of the day. It's like wet cement. You can impress your direction onto it and that shape will hold, but if you don't do that, the brain defaults to old patterns, distractions, whatever is easiest and most familiar. That's why most people scroll their phones first thing in the morning. Their brain learns to chase novelty and reactivity before they've even taken their first breath of air outside. But let's flip that. Let's say instead you wake up and you decide, even in just 60 seconds, that today you're someone who shows up for what matters. That could mean committing to a workout, writing for 30 minutes, or simply saying, I will do the hard thing before the easy one today. When you do that, when you make a conscious choice early in the day, your brain starts laying down a track for follow through. You've created a neural anchor. And as the day unfolds, you've already given your mind a lens to look through. Effort matters. Intention matters. And here's the fascinating part. Your brain doesn't just passively take this in. It begins to filter your environment, your emotional reactions, and your decisions through that morning lens. If your intention is, I'm going to train my mind and body to be stronger today, then later, when the urge to procrastinate shows up, your brain already has a competing signal to weigh it against. You're not just reacting to impulses, you're acting on a plan. This might seem small, it might seem too basic, but what you're actually doing is engaging in one of the most powerful feedback loops your nervous system can run. You're taking conscious control of your attention. And in doing that, you're strengthening the neural circuits responsible for willpower, resilience, and focus. These aren't just ideas. They're biological systems that adapt to the instructions you give them. If you do this consistently, if you wake up and take 1 to 2 minutes every day to define your aim, something subtle but profound begins to happen. Your brain starts to crave that moment. It starts to expect structure, to see clarity, to prioritize. You begin to feel off when you don't lead with intention. That's when discipline shifts from something you have to fight for to something you feel pulled toward, because you're no longer waking up in reaction mode, you're waking up in creation mode. This is the foundation. Without this, every productivity trick, every motivational video, every checklist will collapse under the weight of confusion and emotional reactivity. But with it, you are shaping your own reality from the first minute of your day. And that's not motivational fluff. That's neuroplasticity in action. You're literally teaching your brain, this is who I am now. Start your day with direction, and discipline stops being a struggle. It becomes who you are. Most people wait for the reward to feel good. They wait until the task is finished, the goal is met, the box is checked, and only then do they allow themselves to feel satisfied. But that's actually a mistake. If you want to build discipline that lasts, not for a week, but for years, you have to flip that idea completely. You have to train your brain to associate the effort itself with the reward. That's the habit. That's the real shift, and it changes everything. Here's why. Every time you pursue something difficult, your brain has a choice. It can either register that effort as pain, stress, and discomfort, or it can register that effort as progress, value, and even pleasure. And that choice, that interpretation is not fixed. It's shaped by how you engage with the process. It's shaped by what you tell yourself in the moment when things feel hard. Most people grind through tasks waiting to finally feel good at the finish line, but that's like only enjoying the top of the mountain while resenting every step of the climb. And the brain remembers that. It learns to avoid effort. It learns that hard work is punishment. But when you start associating the process with purpose, when you learn to tell yourself, this is the good part, even when it burns, even when it's boring, even when it's repetitive, your brain begins to change. It starts releasing dopamine during the effort, not just at the end. And when that happens, you're no longer chasing a finish line, you're locked into the path. You don't need to wait for the reward, you are the reward. That's how unstoppable discipline is built. Now, here's the important part. This isn't just mindset. This is biology. Dopamine is a chemical that not only gives you a feeling of pleasure, it tells your brain what's worth repeating. It reinforces behavior. So if you can shift where in the process you receive dopamine, you can rewire your entire approach to discipline. And the most powerful place to get that dopamine is during the effort, right when most people give up. So how do you train this? You start by catching those moments when your brain wants to check out. You're mid-workout, your body is telling you to stop, or you're studying and your focus is fading. That's the exact window. In that moment, you say to yourself, not passively, but consciously, this effort is the signal that I'm becoming the person I want to be. You remind yourself that the discomfort is not a sign to quit, it's the price of progress. And when you start linking that effort with meaning, your brain starts to crave it. The hard work becomes the hook. This is where most people miss the mark. They either rely on external rewards, money, praise, outcomes, or they rely on motivation, which is unpredictable and unreliable. But when you've trained your brain to enjoy the pursuit, you're no longer dependent on either. That's a massive shift. You become more resilient, more focused, and more consistent, not because you're forcing it, but because your brain is literally wired to want the work. This is why people who love the process tend to outperform everyone else. It's not that they don't have bad days. It's not that they never struggle. It's that they've learned how to create a feedback loop where effort feels good. And once that loop is active, it reinforces itself. You show up more, you train harder, you focus longer, and your brain keeps learning, this is who we are. So if you want to become disciplined, not just in bursts, but as a baseline way of being, you have to stop waiting to feel good at the finish line. You have to bring the reward into the work itself. That one habit alone rewires everything. Reward the effort and your brain will follow. We all love big goals. We're drawn to massive transformations, bold plans, and that fantasy moment when everything finally clicks. But here's the truth that most people overlook. The brain doesn't rewire from big, flashy breakthroughs. It rewires from consistency. It rewires from repetition. And more than anything, it rewires from small wins. Tiny actions done over and over again. That's where the real shift happens. That's how discipline becomes automatic. When you perform a small habit, something as simple as making your bed, doing 2 minutes of breath work, taking a cold shower, or writing down your top priority for the day, you're not just getting the task done, you're actually casting a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. And every time you repeat that action, even if it feels minor or unimportant, you're strengthening a circuit in your brain. Those circuits begin to fire faster, they become more efficient, and eventually they start to run on their own without resistance. That's not magic, it's your basal ganglia doing its job. That's your habit system coming online. But here's the thing, this doesn't happen from doing something once or twice. It happens from doing it daily. That's why small wins matter so much. They're sustainable. They don't rely on perfect conditions or bursts of motivation. And because of that, they're repeatable. And repetition is what the brain is built for. Your nervous system is constantly asking, what should I automate? What's worth conserving energy for? And if you show it the same behavior day after day, it will eventually say, okay, I'll take over from here. That's how brushing your teeth became automatic. That's how tying your shoes takes no mental energy. The same principle applies to discipline. But the mistake most people make is waiting until they feel ready to start big. They tell themselves, once I have the time, once I have the energy, I'll go all in. But that's not how change works. The brain resists big change because it burns too much energy, and your body interprets that as a threat, so it pulls you back to the familiar. That's why grand efforts so often collapse after a week. You're trying to leap across a canyon when you should be laying a bridge, one plank at a time. So start tiny and mean it. 5 push-ups every morning, 10 deep breaths, writing 1 page, drinking a glass of water before coffee. These actions may seem too small to matter, but they do. Because every time you follow through, you send a powerful signal to your brain. I show up. And over time, those signals stack. The identity forms. You're no longer trying to be disciplined because the proof is in the reps. And here's something else to understand. Those small wins don't just rewire the brain behaviorally, they change your emotional landscape. Every time you complete a small task, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. Not the chaotic kind you get from social media or sugar, but a steady, regulated release that says, that was good, do it again. This builds positive reinforcement, and now the brain begins to crave those actions, so what started as a discipline tool becomes a desire. You're not forcing it, you're drawn to it. This is how the most successful and consistent people operate. They aren't superhuman. They've just built their lives around small, repeatable wins that create momentum. And momentum is everything, because once it starts, it's easier to keep going than to stop. And once the brain links those small habits with identity and reward, it becomes nearly automatic. The hard truth is, most people will overlook the small stuff because they're hunting for something dramatic. But if you can fall in love with the basics, if you can take pride in the smallest signs of progress, you'll gain something they never will: control over your own system. And once you have that, you don't need hype or motivation. You've built something much more powerful. Stack your small wins and your brain will build the rest. Most people focus on discipline as something internal: mental toughness, willpower, mindset. And while that's important, they overlook a massive piece of the puzzle: their environment, what you surround yourself with, what you see, hear, and interact with every day. Those things are shaping your behavior in ways you probably don't even realize. Your environment isn't new. It's either pulling you closer to the person you want to become or dragging you back into who you were trying to leave behind. We tend to think that discipline means pushing through distractions, saying no to temptation, or staying strong no matter what's happening around us. But the truth is, the most effective form of discipline is the one that doesn't rely on constant resistance. It's the kind that's supported by design, and that starts with controlling your inputs, your space, your routines, the cues you place in front of you. If your phone is the first thing you see in the morning, then your brain learns to associate waking up with instant stimulation. If your workspace is cluttered, your brain has to filter more distractions just to find focus. If your refrigerator is filled with junk food, you're forcing yourself to fight battles that could have been avoided entirely with 5 minutes of planning. This isn't about being perfect, it's about being intentional. Because what's in your environment eventually becomes what's in your habits, and what's in your habits becomes who you are. There's a simple idea that helps here: make the good decisions easier and the bad decisions harder. Want to read more? Leave a book on your pillow. Want to work out consistently? Lay out your clothes the night before. Want to eat clean? Stock your fridge with only the things you've already committed to. These are not motivational hacks. They are signals to your nervous system, reminders that reinforce the identity you're building. The brain responds to cues. It's always scanning, always filtering. When you shape your environment to cue the right actions, you make discipline frictionless. You make it automatic. You don't need to wake up and wonder what to do. You've already built the path. That reduces decision fatigue, which is one of the biggest enemies of consistency. The fewer decisions you have to make, the more energy you have to apply to the work that really matters. And the more you build environments that support discipline, the more those choices start to feel natural. Eventually, walking past the distractions isn't hard because they're not there anymore. Eventually, choosing the hard thing first becomes second nature because it's the only thing visible. And that's when discipline becomes sustainable. Not because you're stronger than everyone else, but because you've stopped relying on brute force and started using structure. You don't need to fight your environment. You need to shape it so that it fights for you. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to build discipline is starting with behavior instead of identity. They set goals, they make to-do lists, they try to follow routines, but underneath it all, they still see themselves as someone who struggles, someone who lacks willpower, someone who's trying to become something they're not. That creates friction, because if your actions are constantly clashing with your self-emission, discipline will always feel like a fight. You might win for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, but eventually you'll burn out and slip back into old patterns. The real shift happens when your actions and identity begin to align. When instead of thinking, I need to act disciplined today, you think, I'm someone who does disciplined things because that's who I am. It seems subtle, but it's a completely different operating system. And the way to install that system is by repeating a very simple phrase. I'm the type of person who trains even when it's uncomfortable. I'm the type of person who finishes what they start. I'm the type of person who gets up early to take control of the day. Display symptomatically. These aren't just words. They are statements that activate your brain's predictive model. Your nervous system listens closely to identity. It wants to be consistent. So when you tell yourself who you are and follow it with action, even a small one, you begin to close the gap between intention and behavior. And once that gap shrinks, discipline stops being something you chase and becomes something you live. And this doesn't mean you have to be perfect. In fact, that's the power of identity-based discipline. It holds even when things get tough. Because when you see yourself as the kind of person who shows up no matter what, you don't question whether or not you'll act. You just do. It's embedded. That's how professional athletes train when they're tired. That's how writers sit down to work on the days their minds are full of noise, not because they always feel like it, but because that's who they are. The brain is constantly seeking alignment. It wants your story, your actions, and your emotions to match. So the more you tell yourself, with clarity and confidence, this is who I am, and then act on that, even in small ways, the more that belief gets reinforced. Those neural pathways grow stronger. Eventually, the identity takes root. And at that point, you're not just doing disciplined things. You've become someone for whom those things are expected, almost automatic. This is where transformation becomes permanent, because it's not built on hype, emotion, or willpower. It's built on identity. And identity, once deeply wired, doesn't disappear when you're tired or stressed. It holds. It keeps showing up, even when you don't feel like it. Act like the person you want to become, and your brain will catch up. There's this belief that progress should always feel good, that if you're on the right path, everything should flow. But the truth is, real growth often feels uncomfortable. It feels messy, uncertain, even frustrating at times. That's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're right where you need to be. Because the brain doesn't change when things are easy. It changes when you push just past your edge, when you're slightly out of your comfort zone, but still in control. That discomfort is actually data. It's your nervous system adapting, learning, building resilience. Every time you stay calm under pressure, follow through when you don't feel like it, or sit with the urge to quit and keep going anyway, you're teaching your brain a new pattern. You're saying, this is how we operate now. And if you can interpret that stress, that discomfort as a signal of progress rather than a reason to stop, you unlock a whole new level of discipline. It's not about avoiding resistance. It's about leaning into it strategically. Not to punish yourself, but to stretch your limits just enough that your brain has to grow to keep up. And what's incredible is that over time, your capacity expands. What used to feel hard becomes normal. What once triggered doubt becomes a signal to focus. You don't just tolerate discomfort, you start to trust it. Discipline isn't about feeling great all the time. It's about staying grounded when things don't feel great. It's about holding the line even when your emotions or energy want to pull you away from it. And when you start to see those moments as opportunities, not threats, you stop flinching at challenge. You welcome it. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, and you'll discover discipline that it builds. So if there's one habit that rewires your brain for unstoppable discipline, it's this: learning to fall in love with the process. Not the outcome, not the applause, not the highlight reel, the quiet, often uncomfortable, consistent process of showing up day after day, moment after moment. And you start rewarding the effort itself. When you anchor your identity in the actions you repeat, when you shape your environment, and when you trust that discomfort is part of the path, not a signal to stop, but a cue to grow, your brain begins to change. Your patterns change. And eventually, who you are changes. Because discipline isn't something you force, it's something you become.